and this is something I want to try that's a little bit new. I want to open this up by going through all of the points that I really want to go through very, very quickly. That way, you guys have some preview of everything that we'll go through. And if you're a very quick learner, you might just connect all the dots and then you'll already get it and you can be on your way. Let's start with just bottom to top my notes. So I wanted to open up by saying that my experience with notes comes from being a student, obviously, like you guys, but also from tutoring and doing essay writing. So those are the main places where a lot of my note-taking habits come from and where I learned how to take notes. That's going to affect my perspective on this. And as we'll kind of go through this, you'll find maybe you have some different opinions philosophically on how notes should work, which is fine. You know, have your own opinion. That's cool. We have to move quick. I just want to give some prescriptions that are going to apply to as many people as possible. A lot of this is going to be use cases as well. So your opinions on this is going to be very different because to begin, let's answer the who of note-taking. The number one question I want to answer first is who. This should seem obvious, but some people have never considered this. So from the very beginning, consider who the notes are for. They are usually for you. And if they are for somebody else, you are in an extraneous situation. So congrats, you're the very first group that I will push into the extraneous situation category. Most of what we're going to be talking about here are notes that are designed for you in particular, because that really simplifies things. If the biggest considerations here should be for you, then you're going to be the only reader, and the notes only need to be legible for you. This helps us a lot. This gives us a lot of wiggle room, right? Because if we had to restrict our notes to something that's legible to as many people as possible, something like a book or a study or something like this where we have a wider audience, then we have a million considerations we have to make. But if the notes are only for you, these are things that can just be a couple of words, because as long as they convey that idea to you, you're fine. It's an audience of one. That gives us tons of wiggle room with what notes can look like, right? Some students write so poorly that they themselves cannot read it. So if you are one of those students where you feel like when you go back and read your notes, you can't read them, that's problem number one that you have to get over. You need to fix your penmanship, or you need to find a new medium by which you will take notes. So find something that is going to be legible to you. If you're not serving that audience, if that audience doesn't understand the work that you're creating through notes, you have to start there. If you can't read your own stuff, you have to fix that. If you don't understand your notes, you have to fix that, right? So it doesn't help to just do one or two words if in the future, when you review the notes, you can't read them, right? So let's kind of get into why. Now, why? This is different for everybody, right? It depends on your specific situation. Let's just go through some kinds of note-taking that I do, and we'll kind of, we'll start to see the different things I need to focus on, and that starts to answer the question of why, and it will start to answer the question of how and of what. So if I look at scheduling, calendars, and planners, these sorts of items have things I want to take notes on that are very similar. So I need to know times, right, for scheduling, calendars, and planners. I need to know blocks of availability. That's another kind of information that I need to take notes on. Prior engagements, ongoing and repeating events. So if a mom tells me, oh, I have to take the kids to piano practice every Friday, and then we have soccer on every other Wednesday. If they mention something like that in passing in our very first phone conversation, when I'm trying to get down, a schedule for our tutoring sessions, these are things that I'll take notes on, because thank God that they had mentioned this to me in passing, and that I had a note-taking system which could capture this information that otherwise would have moved right past me and I would have forgotten. So in the future, if, for instance, whether it's her or I accidentally tries to schedule something on a day where I know that they have a prior engagement, then I have the notes necessary to be like, oh, I have a note for you on Wednesday that normally you take the kids to soccer. Is that something you guys don't do anymore? And then they go, oh shit, that's right. I have soccer on that day. That's crazy. How do you remember that? Oh, well, it says here in my notes from our very first call that you mentioned it in passing. Usually when people mention scheduling things, I just try to note them down so that in the future I could catch something like this and just save us both a headache. And they appreciate that a lot, because what that also communicates on a rhetorical level is that you're paying attention to everything that they're saying and that you're listening with intent, which I most certainly am. And so, a lot of side benefits to notes. But anywho, that's one whole category, right? If they mention future vacations, like, yeah, we're going to be taking off on Labor Day and going down to Havasu and whatever. If they tell me that, then I also want to note that down as well, so that I don't bother them. So that's scheduling, calendars, planners. You're doing stuff like that. Start thinking about what types of things you need to know to incorporate those into your system. So if you need times for your calendar, know times. If you need to know what kind of engagement it is, like you need to draw a line between work, personal, school, study, whatever, then, figure out whatever information you need to make that distinction. So I think that anything in terms of scheduling is kind of its own group, and we can think about what are the items you need, take notes on those, and format your notes in a way that's going to fit that, which we'll get to in a second. Another group is probably going to be call notes, email summaries, client info, tutoring logs, journals, anything that's repeating like that. These kinds of notes you're going to want to iterate upon, right? They're going to want to be in a system where you're able to continuously add to it over time. So like for call notes, for instance, if I'm doing calls with tutoring clients, and if you're a normal person and you run a business or anything, you should have call logs. And if you don't, create a system for that and keep track of that, because you'd be surprised at how helpful it is to have notes from every single call, not only to hold you accountable, but to hold the other person accountable as well, and to like avoid discrepancies about miscommunication and stuff like that. Additionally, if you take call notes and then you email those to a client at the end of the call, that really does a very great job of holding you both accountable, because at the same time, that's creating a paper trail that you can go back to later. So if they try to bring into dispute the call notes that you took, you can say, hey, look, I have a time-stamped email. Like these call notes were sent to you immediately afterwards. So I'm actually just looking at the copy in the email. This isn't doctored at all. Shit like that. It's just very helpful to have that paper trail in business. So call notes are a great way of doing that. Anyways, for these sorts of things like call notes, email summaries, client info, tutoring logs, journals, repeated words are things we're going to want to write down. Focus and intent, which is going to be different for each of these categories, but you're going to want to keep track of that. The times, the order, subjects, confidence levels, lead, progress. So like if we're doing call notes, I want to know how close did I get that customer to buying with me, right? And if they seem like they're very hesitant, I probably want to note that. It's probably not worth spending a bunch of time on that customer. But if they were very, very close, like they wanted to book something, but were upset that you didn't have a website or something like that, then note that, kind of go back to that later. It's helpful to keep track of that as well. So how close is your lead to converting? And then things that are probably more related to you guys. Debate reviews, lectures, rhetorical analyses, book reviews, narrative advice. These kinds of more long-form notes that are based on content which has a set start and end. So if your professor has a lecture online or you're doing a review of a debate, things like this, I often find that timestamps are going to be incredibly helpful. If for a book that is digital, we normally don't have to think about it because we can control F and everything is indexed very nicely. I think we want to have a similar system to navigate a video or navigate a piece of media that we're trying to do commentary or notes on. So whatever the way is that you can like chronologically keep track of everything, whether that's through timestamps or whether that's through notes that are like a flow chart of what happened, you can be very creative when you're taking notes for things like this. But I often find that some kind of chronological tracker, usually through timestamps if we're working with video, is something that I personally like to do. Another thing that I want to keep track of is quotes, right? And the reason I started with timestamps is everything we're going to talk about after needs to be kept in the confines of timestamps. So I guess, like, if I'm thinking about it, we need timestamps to assign to every single thing we take notes on, right? Timestamps should be running, at least for me, on the margins of the page, so that no matter what I'm taking notes on, if I start from the top of the page and go to the bottom, I guarantee everything happened in chronological order. And if at any point I feel like, oh, we're like 2 or 5 minutes into this, or oh, there's a really big gap between now and the last time I took a note on what time we're at, then I'll just add that in. And that's really, really helpful because, again, we want to think about why we're taking the notes, because we want to think about how later and when later we're going to be looking at those notes. So if later you're going to be reviewing this alongside the video or alongside the book, keep that in mind. What kind of interesting things can you do? Well, if you're navigating the book, you probably want page numbers, right? You may even want an indicator into what section of the page it's on. So you may come up with a clever indication for, oh, it's in the top third of page 242. Like I've met somebody where what they do is they'll write the page number down of where the quote is in the book, and they'll draw a little asterisk up if it's in the top third, a little asterisk sideways, like a horizontal dash if it's in the middle of that page, or they'll do like another little like dash down if it's in the lower third of the page. And I thought that was clever. And, you know, I think it kind of builds on the idea of dog ears.
What do you do next?
Let's pick this one. This is a maths book, and I did actually stick a bookmark in this one earlier because it's got a definite dog ear there where he's pointing to the word right angle.
And there's a Newton dog ear, and as we said, a right angle pointing at a right angle. We think maybe he's pointing that out.
Yeah, I said I was sceptical about that theory, but he does definitely seem to be pointing to a particular phrase on that page. So
Yeah.
It definitely shows that he used his books. They weren't just there on his shelves for decoration.
Which are the folds that you do in pages, like the little crease you do so you could find your place in the book. Some people like to crease to point to where in the text they mean to go back and look. So there's all sorts of different versions of this. And if you play around with it, you'll find your own. Because again, this is an audience of one. This is only for you. So whatever clever, fun way you can find to make note-taking not only functional for you, but enjoyable, do that. You know, it's, again, audience of one. Doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about your notes, only you. So it needs to be navigable by you. And it needs to be navigable whenever you go back to navigate it. So it's best that we kind of start to talk about when and what you're doing. So for me, for instance, if I'm talking about something like essays, I'm looking through a bunch of sources and taking notes in the sources because later on, and if you missed this YouTube video, do !YT, and you can go over there and check it out. But basically, when I'm doing note-taking on sources, I'm thinking I have to go back and get quotes from these sources. So everything that I am doing is for the sole purpose of going back and getting quotes. So maybe this is a best place to start because it's very structured. So for essays, again, I'm just going to repeat this. I need to get notes to give me the quotes from sources, which are easily found when I go back to copy, paste, and cite these things. So I use 3 to 4 words of the title, so that I can see it in the Chrome tab. I don't even care what the title is on the source. I care what it looks like in the Chrome tab because that's what I'll be looking at when I go back to cite everything. And then I'll have 2 to 3 unique words of the quoted sentence, right? And the reason I pick unique words or words that are not likely to repeat in that order anywhere else in the text is because the hope is that when I go back to Control F in that later, I'll only have one result, and that one result will basically be that sentence. Or if there's 3 results, it'll be obvious that, oh, okay, this is obviously the sentence I wanted, right? We want to narrow down that Control F query to as few results as possible. And that's the way that I found to do it, is you just pick the most unique words in the most unique order from the sentence you want to quote. And then when you Control F, when you try to find that in the text later, you'll find that very quickly. And then oftentimes, I'll try to include a vague description of the significance of the source. Generally, this is at most 1 sentence, but normally like maybe 5 to 6 or 7 words. And the reason that I do this, sometimes an essay client will kind of throw it on me later that we need to do an annotated bibliography. And if I only took notes for, Control F-ing a source or Control F-ing a quote from a source, I don't have enough information there to do that annotated bibliography, to write out why we picked a source and what that source contains. However, I can fudge a lot of that very, very quickly if I just had a very quick summary of why I picked the source. Because if I can look at why I picked the source and skim the abstract really quickly, I can write the entire annotated bibliography entry. So again, this is over time I found what is the least amount of notes, what is the most concise way possible that I can find the information I need for the review later. That's all notes are for, is they're for the review later. So if you don't know what a review looks like for you either, you don't know how you're going to use those notes or when you're going to use them, consider that. If you don't already have a place or time or whatever to sit down and study, start to think about that. Start to think about, when are these notes going to be used? How are they going to be used? And that'll give you an answer to like what we are going to be doing with the notes. What are the things that we need to pick? Because you're just trying to help future you. That's the one member of your audience. So just try to think about what that person needs. And when you're in the shoes of future you and you're reviewing those notes, try to think about all the things you would want past you to have done instead. So if you're like, damn, I really wish I knew why I needed these sources, then, put a little note for next time to do that. And then again, you need a system. You need to be in the habit of taking notes and of using your notes, so that if you put something like, hey, next time, make sure you write something about the source significance, that'll get to future you, so that future you can become past you and write the notes the future you wants, et cetera, et cetera. It goes around and around and around. But the notes are the grounding force. They're the thing that you will constantly come back to. And so you really want to make a habit out of that system, and you want to make sure that it's something you're comfortable working with and working within. Because that's not only the way that you're going to get this information as quickly as possible, it's not only the note-taking system, but it's also our means of correcting and improving and iterating upon that system. So, we want to have both of those parts. We don't want to pick a note-taking system that we'll just use for forever and a half into the future. We want to iterate upon that. We want to improve upon that, because it's very unlikely we'll get that right the first time. So making sure not only when you're going to be taking notes and how you're going to be taking them, but also when are you iterating upon that? How are you improving upon those notes? And make sure that whenever you're doing one, you're kind of also working on the other. Consider both at the same time. Because it's very difficult for past you to predict what future you wants in the notes, in much the same way that it's difficult for future you to, go back to past you and fix that. So, you want some kind of bridge between those two. And notes is working one way, but you also want it to work the other way for iterating as well. All right, so that's basically everything with the notes thing. We'll go on the whiteboard now, and I'll kind of break this down and explain it more, more in depth with diagrams and stuff.
Hello. I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity through the Patreon to play with a lot of the new gear that I've kind of utilized for this video. That would include the green screen and some new lights. Hopefully moving forward I'm able to acquire more of those things and get better about using them, but everybody has to start somewhere, so this video is that. Speaking of this video, after going through the entire VOD, I kind of figured that it would be good to touch on a lot of the particular topics again, with some practical examples and a bit more feedback from people in terms of what they're looking for on note-taking advice. So what I'll be doing over the next couple of weeks is talking to a lot of streamers and viewers alike to figure out what it is that they need help with, and then I will answer those questions through this series. I hope to make more short kinds of videos around the length of this one, and have those actually be made of entirely, offline content, nothing that's been from the stream. There is an edited VOD that will be dropped for the patrons first on Patreon, which is new. If you want to support me, that's where you could do it. After it's on the Patreon for about a week, then it'll drop on the YouTube and be accessible to everybody. Thanks again to the patrons for allowing me to get more gear and kind of take this thing more seriously and, advance the quality of it. I hope I can continue to do that, and if this, gets to a livable level, we'll be in a better situation overall. So thanks again, and I'll see you guys in the next one.